Hi everyone, welcome back. So section one looked at the history and government of the United States, and it was very long because they tried to put everything about the history of the United States into a very tiny section within a small chapter. Section two is about half the size. There's only 20 slides. This is about the economy and culture of the United States. So let's not waste any time. Let's get to it. Okay, so if you look at the United States, originally we started out as an agrarian society, and you can see that here by the number of people who are involved in agriculture. This number has gone down, right? The amount that's being produced has increased because the size of the farms are getting larger, but the number of people who are on the farms, that's getting smaller, right? So people are growing a lot more on a lot more land, but it doesn't require that many people because we have technology, right? But then the second phase, what happened is that we started to industrialize, and we became this industrialized nation in the 1800s and then leveled off. And then a lot of the industry left the United States and went to other countries like Mexico and China, places where corporations could get people to do the same job for a few lower price, right? Lower wage. And what we have become is more of a service oriented society. We talked about this in class when I asked you all, hey, what does your parent do? And almost all of us fell within this area of the service industry, right? It doesn't account for the tertiary, well, it's tertiary, but not beyond that. Okay, so if you look at this, the major sectors of the economy, again, this is a different way of looking at it. 1900, right? You had about 38% of the population involved in agriculture. What is that? 36 in manufacturing, 27 in service. What happens is agriculture 1950 gets small, 12%, now it's only 2%, and service industry is like 73% of the economy. So you can see how it's changed over time. Right. The United States is one of the world's economic superpowers, right? If you look at it right here, this is the gross national product of a country. This talks about all the goods and services produced by a country, and the United States is, in these terms, the wealthiest. If you take the per capita gross national product, we are not, right? Because then you divide it by the population, you get others that are wealthier, right? Because we probably have so many who are the super rich, right? And then we also have some people who are super poor. But anyway, if you look at it, the United States only has 7% of the world's land use, which is actually, or the land area, that's actually pretty large. We have 5% of the population. We're about the third largest in terms of population. I think it's closer to 350, 360 million people right now. We have one of the strongest, most diverse technologically advanced economies in the world. We are a leader in agricultural production. As a matter of fact, that's always been problematic because we produce too much. We're a world leader in manufacturing, even though we don't produce nearly as much here as we used to, because as I said before, many corporations choose to have other people in other countries produce it because those people work for lower wages, and so they can reduce the price of the production of their goods. 10% of all the world's exports, goods sold to other countries, come from the United States as well. But we have a trade deficit. We import more than what we export with most countries, especially China. Okay, if you look at this, the reason for our success is we have these vast natural resources. This map just shows a small amount of them, right? So there's oil, some other things on there which I cannot read very well from here, but coal, there's gold, there's lumber, timber, a lot of different products or resources. You can see here where we are, there's a lot of coal. We also have natural gas where we are. There's oil, and even more reserves are being discovered. I heard the other day that there's another huge oil reserve discovered up here in Alaska. There's gold up here in the Rocky Mountains. One of the largest finds of silver in the world was the Comstock lode in Nevada back in the 1800s. What goes along with this, though, too, which is a source of our success, is we have this stable political system, and we have an economic system that allows for free enterprise, right? That means that private individuals can make the most of the resources and the technology to earn a profit, and they're driven by that profit. So that encourages people to be entrepreneurs and to get involved in business and in industry. Right, we're also, as I said, a leader in agricultural output. We have a lot of farms and ranches. We produce fruits, vegetables, grain, foods, cattle, livestock, that sort of thing. 40% of the world's corn is done here, as if we didn't know that, and just look around Illinois in the summertime. 12% of the world's production of cotton, 9% of wheat, 19% of cattle. Right? We have very fertile soil, great climate. We have a lot of mechanization. You look up here, all these combines at work, right? There's different regions that produce different things. In the Midwest and the South, we have crop farming, and we also have livestock where we are here. In New England, there's fishing in the Grand Banks, which we share with Canada. And then in the West, there's a lot of livestock. You get dairy in California and Wisconsin, just all sorts of agricultural products. Okay, so agriculture and industry in the United States, this map shows some of that. The color coded is agriculture. So out here in this color, there's dairy farming, right? You can see that color there. Where it's yellow, there you get commercial grain, livestock, where it's more the burnt orange color. So here, dairy farming is that, which I didn't know there was dairy farming there. But anyway, and then you get livestock and crop here. And then in this area here, specified agriculture, specialized. So just a lot of them. And then these right here show where there's other types of resources, so Southern California, Central California. In the Midwest, here, this used to be known as the industrial belt. Of late, it's been known as the Rust Belt because a lot of the manufacturing centers that were here in the 1800s, early 1900s have shut down, right? Places in Detroit, Chicago, that sort of thing, as manufacturing has left the United States. Okay, an industrial giant, it kind of continues, right? Our output is pretty rapid. We have advanced technology, and this shows some of them. So here's our leading industries: petroleum, steel, transportation equipment, chemicals, electronics, food processing, telecommunications, all sorts of things, lumber, and mining. Here are the industrial areas that I talked about in the Northeast right there. This is where the Industrial Revolution began in the textile industry. The reason for that, there are great harbors right there in New York, Boston, Philadelphia, very good harbors there. In the Midwest, this was an area too along the Great Lakes, so water was important for transportation, right? And the source of natural resources. There was the Wasabi Range up in Minnesota. Also, there was a lot of iron ore near Pittsburgh where they produced steel. Down in the South, they produced a lot of industries. This is new industries, but also in this Piedmont region right here along the Appalachian Mountains, that's where a lot of textile mills used to be, right? And then in the West, they're known for like Silicon Valley, and then aircraft in Seattle, high-tech stuff out there. Okay, in a post-industrial society, we've shifted over to the service industry, and we have talked about this before, so this shouldn't come as any surprise. This is economic activity that where you provide a service rather than a product, right? So about 3/4 of the American population is employed in the service industry, so I am as a teacher, finance, medicine, transportation, anything where you provide a service. If you work in government, that's the case. So again, this is the same image I showed before, where it started out where more people were involved in agriculture. Now agriculture only makes up 2% of the industry, people, what they work in now, whereas before it was like 27% in service industries. Now it's almost 3/4 of our population. So this is just another diagram showing you how America's economy has changed. Originally, more people were involved in agriculture, but you can see this in 1948, it's still only about 5%. Now it's about 2%, as we discussed before. Manufacturing is continuing to decline. It was about in 1948 is around 30%. It's gone down to about 10%. Those involved in government are the same, but government also is part of the service industry, right? So the service industry continues to climb, right? So you can see this, how America has transformed. Another transformation has to do with multinational corporations. So oftentimes those companies that began here in the United States are multinational. They sell throughout the world, right? I remember back in 1983, I went from the United States to Germany, and there were McDonald's over there, all sorts of different things. Apple computers are all over the world, Microsoft, these are multinational corporations, right? We are we are a leading trading nation, and so many of the corporations that are centered here in the United States do business throughout the world. We're also a leading importer. Our tastes are insatiable. Americans want all sorts of products, and we get those from other places. We export and ship other goods to other countries. Most of that is our agricultural products, but also manufactured goods and raw materials. Our most important trading nations are Canada and Mexico. Probably about, I think it's a huge overwhelming majority of everything that Canada exports comes here to the United States. So they depend very heavily upon us. Part of that is because of NAFTA, which now has a new name, and to be honest with you, I'm not sure what it is, but this is where there's free trade between the United States and Canada, and I need to update that. That was a new trade agreement that was just signed by President Trump this year. Okay, let's shift now from the economy, and we're going to start talking about American society. So America has changed significantly since its founding. Used to be the majority of people were overwhelmingly white. Those people who were African American were descendants of slaves who were brought over here forcefully. Currently, about 65% of the population has European origin. If you look at the number, though, of Asians and Latinos that are in the United States, that has changed dramatically from the diagram, the bar diagram on the left to the right, right? Latino population is about 16%. They overtook the Black population as the largest minority group in recent years because there's been a huge influx of them coming in as our immigration laws have changed, right? So we're becoming even more diverse. All right, and I've shown you this in the last section. This shows you the diversity, how sometimes different groups are in different places, but if you go county by county, Germans overwhelmingly, they have more counties than anywhere else where they make up the bulk of the population. I just noticed something right here. My mother's ancestors came from Norway, and they settled in this part of Wisconsin. It's pretty interesting. All right, also here, if you look at different ethnic minorities in the United States, you can see here, this is ethnic minorities. It used to be down here in the South, that's where ethnic minorities were, and those were African Americans. Down there, that's where a large concentration were, and over here on the West Coast, which makes sense because people coming from Asia had a tendency to come across the Pacific and settle in these locations. And many people who are of Asian ancestry came here as a result of the gold rush. They wanted to come here, they wanted to get some gold. Down here, this is the Hispanic population. This is in areas where Spain originally colonized, and they were part of the Spanish Empire. And then out here in the West, that's where we have the Native American population. Many of them were forced west. There's an Indian Removal Act during the Jackson administration where Native Americans were forced with the Trail of Tears, other forced movement of Native Americans who were east of the Mississippi, pushing them west of the Mississippi, trying to settle all of them in Oklahoma. And then there was the reservation system, and Native Americans were placed on reservations. Okay, so languages and religion, if you look at this chart right here, those people who profess to have a religion. Of those, 52% in the United States are Protestant. You can see here 16% say no religion, a small portion, 2% Jewish, 24% Catholic, and then 6% other. That might be Buddhist, Hindu, Islam, any other religion, right? But 75% of the people in the United States are Christian, right? We don't have an official language in the United States, but English is the dominant language. Spanish is the language that is second most commonly spoken language here in the United States. And I have, in my lifetime, you can tell sometimes you go places where it's in English and then it's in Spanish. That you would never have seen that when I was young, but you saw the influx of the Spanish population into the United States in more recent years. Okay, another thing too, talking about our culture, our art is very diverse as well. So you go back, there was a group of people in the Hudson River School, and they would paint beautiful landscapes like this in the 1800s. Of course, Native American art has been around for a very long time, like this pot right here. This right here is Jeffersonian architecture. This is Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's home that he designed in Virginia near Charleston. He was known as the Sage of Monticello. Our town, Monticello, we are the Monticello Sages, named after him, right? And then this right here, I put this picture on here because I believe that African Americans have contributed significantly to American culture. This is a early jazz band. Jazz became very, very popular. It's out of the music of the African Americans that we're going to get rock and roll, and how many important elements of our culture have emerged as a result. Okay, and then our pop culture, it has becomes popular here, and then it has just spread throughout the world. That's the one thing that people really seem to embrace about the United States, especially our music, right? It evolved out of the influence of various ethnic groups, especially African Americans, with jazz and blues and gospel and rock and roll. All of those have their roots in African American music, and some historians date that back to like being on a plantation as a slave. If you're working there all day long, what many of them did to pass the time was sing songs. And sometimes they would be the blues, kind of, like, oh, you're down and out. Heard an old joke one time, white people can't sing the blues because they didn't have anything to be blue about, right? But anyway, then that kind of evolved into jazz, which evolved into rock and roll, right? And then there's the southern white population influenced by that too, with bluegrass and country, right? Another thing that's hugely popular around the world is our film industry and music, or movies here in the United States. Other countries are starting to produce their own films as well that are becoming popular worldwide, but not to the extent that the United States has. Okay, American life today, we have, I'm thinking more like 360 million people, right? Very high standard of living, meaning that, we have transportation, we have housing, we have cars, clothing, televisions, those things that make our lives very comfortable. Some people in many parts of the world don't have those same luxuries, right? A lot of people seek the American dream, which is to have a home and a better life for their children than what they had, right? About 80% of the population lives in the cities and suburbs, so those of us who live in rural areas are a minority. This shift was made possible because of the ownership of an automobile, right? There's one car for every 1.3 people in the United States. That's unreal, right? We're very, very mobile. We have good transportation system in terms of our highways and airports, railways and expressways. But for those of us out in rural areas, right, we know that we have a problem with public transportation. We really have to have our cars. Right. How Americans live, work, and play. If you look at this, 60% is employed. Up until the pandemic, our unemployment rate was only about 3.5%, which is almost full employment, right? Half of the women or half of the workforce is women, so that's not the case historically. So this has only come about in the last 40 years or so. Three-fourths of the American workers, as we said before, work in the service industry. Um, Many service industry jobs require high level of education, right? We value education. It is required for people from ages 6 or 7 all the way up to 16. It's mandatory, it's compulsory, right? We have 2,600 four-year public and private colleges and universities, which that's not only for us, but people come from around the world to go to those. We have a lot of free time in which we are able to have leisure time, vacation time. Unfortunately, though, we continue to have about a 13% poverty rate. Now, poverty rate is kind of relative because our poverty in the United States looks very different than the poverty that some people suffer from in other locations. Okay, so after this, you can take the quiz over this section. There's also going to be a worksheet on the states and capitals. And then next week, we'll get to section 3 and finish up chapter 6. Thanks so much for taking the time.